My father looked me straight in the eye and said, "You are the biggest disappointment in this family." Silence fell over the dinner table. My hands trembled, but I kept my voice steady. "Then maybe you should stop asking me for money." I stood up, pulled out my phone and scrolled through years of receipts, rent, tuition, hospital bills. I read each number aloud, one by one. My mother dropped her spoon. My brother looked away. And for the first time in 40 years, I saw fear in their eyes, not disappointment. Linda sat alone on the edge of her small, neatly made bed, her fingers brushing against the fraying hem of the quilt her grandmother had sewn decades ago. She was 40 now, and yet every visit to her parents' house made her feel like the forgotten child again, the middle one. Not the golden boy, Mark, her older brother, now a celebrated neurosurgeon with a feature in the local newspaper. Not the miracle baby Emily, the youngest, a glamorous attorney with a beachfront condo. No, Linda was just there, not hated, not loved, just tolerated. She scrolled through her phone and paused at the newest photo posted on her mother's Facebook, one of the entire family at last Sunday's brunch. Her parents were there, Mark of course, Emily, radiant as always, her brother-in-law, nieces, even the family dog. Linda's name wasn't tagged. But more painfully, she wasn't in the photo at all. She hadn't even been invited. A dull ache spread through her chest, familiar like an old wound reopened. She zoomed in on the photo, her spot at the table empty, replaced by a decorative plant. Linda wasn't surprised. It wasn't the first time she'd been left out of a family event, but it was the first time they posted it so publicly, so proudly. She turned off her phone and sat in silence. Growing up, Linda always knew she was different, but not in the way children hope. Her earliest memory was at a birthday party, not hers, Mark's 10th. He got a new bike, a cake shaped like a soccer ball, a backyard full of neighbourhood kids. A week later, when Linda turned 7, there was no party, just leftover cake. Vanilla. She hated vanilla. At Christmas, her siblings tore into mountains of gifts while Linda unwrapped her predictable sweater. "It's practical," her mum would say. "You're the sensible one." She was expected to be understanding, not dramatic. "You know your brother works so hard. Your sister's just a baby." Always excuses. Linda had mastered silence by the time she turned 13. Her feelings became private, her disappointments quiet. She got good grades, better than both her siblings actually, but there was no praise, only comparisons. Mark was always too busy saving lives. Emily was destined for greatness. Linda just liked to read. In high school, she applied to a writing competition and won 2nd place. She rushed home with the certificate in her hand, heart pounding, cheeks flushed. Her mother barely glanced at it. 2nd place? Why not 1st? She taped it on her bedroom wall anyway. It's still there, faded and curled at the edges. After college, Linda got a job in marketing. Not glamorous, not prestigious, but she loved it. She built a quiet, stable life, paid her bills, took care of herself. But every family dinner reminded her that success, in her parents' eyes, wore a white coat or held a law degree. Her mother once introduced her to a family friend by saying, "This is Linda. She does something creative, I think." Still, Linda tried. She never missed a birthday, never forgot a holiday. She was always the one who brought homemade gifts, who offered to help with moving or babysitting. She sent flowers when her mum was sick, organised surprise dinners, offered to cover groceries when her dad retired early, and yet she remained invisible. The final sting came just last week when Emily posted a collage, family memories through the years. Linda appeared in exactly one photo, a blurry group shot from 1999, cropped at the shoulders. That was the moment it hit her, not just that she was being overlooked, but that she'd been erased. Linda leaned back on her bed, the quilt rising gently with her breath. Maybe, she thought, maybe this was just who she was to them. The footnote, the afterthought. But a flicker of something unfamiliar stirred inside her. Not sadness, not yet anger, but recognition. She saw the truth now, clearly, painfully. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Linda sat at her kitchen table, the soft hum of her laptop filling the silence. She was wrapping up another successful campaign at work. The company had just landed a major client, and Linda, as the lead marketer, had worked tirelessly to make it happen. Her colleagues praised her quietly as she led a team to ensure the project was completed on time and within budget. She was proud of what she had achieved, but as she scrolled through the company's internal newsletter, her mind drifted back to her family. Her phone buzzed with a notification, a new post from her mother. It wasn't uncommon for her mother to post on social media, but today's photo was different. It wasn't just a picture of Linda's parents, Mark and Emily. It was a family photo taken in front of their newly renovated home. Linda stared at it for a few moments, trying to process what she was seeing. There they were, her parents standing proudly on the front steps of the house. Mark was beside them, wearing his signature expensive watch, and Emily, radiant in a tailored blazer, was holding a glass of wine. The image screamed perfection. But Linda wasn't in it. She wasn't even mentioned. It was a family portrait, a snapshot of success, and Linda was absent. She swallowed hard, feeling something tighten in her chest. It was the unmistakable feeling of being left out, of being forgotten. She had seen these photos before, the ones that excluded her, but this one felt different. This time it was personal. Linda closed the laptop and set her phone aside. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling, the emptiness of her apartment pressing down on her. This wasn't the first time her parents had left her out, but it was the first time it felt so deliberate. The absence was too blatant, too obvious. It wasn't just that she wasn't included in the photo, it was that she had been erased from the narrative of their lives. Her phone buzzed again. Another notification from her mother. We had such a lovely time with Mark and Emily today, so proud of them both. Can't believe how much our family has grown. Linda's fingers hovered over the message, but she couldn't bring herself to reply. How could she? What was there to say when the words never seemed to matter? She had been sending text messages, calling, sending gifts, all for the sake of keeping up appearances. But now, looking at this post, she saw the truth in full view. She wasn't just an afterthought, she wasn't even part of the picture. Her mind raced back to the years of effort, of trying so hard to prove her worth to a family that had never seen it. She had tried everything. She had worked overtime, volunteered for every family task, and kept up with the birthday cards and flowers. But every effort seemed to fall short. Her achievements, her promotions, her successes were always brushed aside in favour of Mark's medical journals and Emily's latest legal victory. It was as if her accomplishments didn't even exist, as if they were meaningless in comparison. A memory flashed through Linda's mind, the Christmas when she had received her promotion. It was the job she had been working toward for years. It was the culmination of long nights and sacrificed weekends. She couldn't wait to share the news with her family. But when she did, her mother barely reacted. Instead, her mum turned the conversation to Mark's latest research paper and Emily's big case. Linda had watched as her own moment was swallowed up by their praise. She had let it go back then, telling herself that it didn't matter. After all, she had a career she loved and a good life. But now, seeing the photo, seeing her family moving forward without her, it felt different. It hurt more than she had ever admitted to herself. Linda opened her phone again and tapped on the family group chat. She stared at the screen, the cursor blinking as if waiting for her to say something. But what was there to say? She wasn't even sure if they cared anymore. She deleted the message before sending it, then powered off her phone. She didn't want to cry anymore. The truth was hard to swallow, but Linda couldn't deny it anymore. Her family, her own flesh and blood, had built a life without her in it. They had created a perfect image, one that didn't include her. And for the first time in her life, Linda realised something that would change everything. She had been living for them, for their approval, for their recognition, but they would never give it. And now she had to decide what to do next. Maybe it was time to stop trying. Linda paced in her small apartment, glancing at the clock. Her mother's birthday was tomorrow, and she had spent weeks picking out the perfect gift. After all these years of feeling invisible, Linda wanted to show her mother that she cared. She wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was the hope that one day her efforts might be seen. Maybe this gift would be the one that finally proved her worth. She had gone all out this year, a custom-made necklace with her mother's initials engraved, delicate but elegant. It was the kind of piece that spoke of thoughtfulness, the kind that might make her mother stop and say, "You know, I've never told you, but I'm proud of you." She wrapped it carefully in soft white tissue paper, placed it in a velvet box, and then slipped it into a bag. The excitement she once felt about giving her mother something special now had an undertone of desperation. As she finished getting ready, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She checked the screen. Mum. A small knot formed in her stomach. It was just a few days ago that she had posted that family photo online, the one where Linda was absent. She wasn't sure if she was ready for another one of their awkward, superficial conversations, but she answered, "Hi, Mum." "Linda? Oh, thank goodness you answered. Listen, I really need to ask you for a favour." Her mother's voice came through the phone, tight with urgency. "I've been trying to get this new car, but the dealer's giving me a hard time. Could you help me with the down payment? Just a couple thousand, and I'll pay you back as soon as I can." Linda froze for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. She had been helping her parents financially for years, paying for medical bills, covering emergencies, even helping her siblings out when they needed it. But this request, so casual, so matter-of-fact, sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't even a question, it was a demand. And the timing was always the same, right before a holiday or special occasion. She couldn't remember the last time her mother had asked how she was doing, only what she could give. "Of course, Mum. I'll transfer the money later today," Linda said, trying to keep her voice steady, hiding the bitter taste in her mouth. "Thank you so much, sweetheart," her mother replied, the relief in her voice palpable. "I knew I could count on you. You're always so good to us." Linda's stomach churned. She wasn't good to them. She was used. It wasn't love that motivated her to send the money. It was the desperate need for some kind of acknowledgement, some kind of validation that she mattered. But she knew it was futile. Her mother never saw it that way. Just as she hung up, the silence of the apartment felt deafening. Linda stared out of the window, the evening sky turning grey with the coming storm. She had planned to call her mother later that evening to wish her a happy birthday, but part of her wasn't sure she wanted to. Half an hour later, her phone buzzed again. Mum. Linda hesitated before answering. What could it be this time? Another financial request? Or perhaps just a call to fill the silence? "Linda, I have to tell you something. You know, you really are the most challenging child I have," her mother's voice came again, but this time there was a sharpness in her tone. "You're always so difficult, always overthinking everything. Why can't you just be more like Mark or like Emily? They don't cause any trouble. I swear you're like a thorn in my side sometimes. It's like you never understand that we're just trying to help you." Linda's grip tightened on the phone. A thorn in her side. She could feel the tears prickling behind her eyes. The cruel irony of it all. The woman who had relied on Linda for money, for favours, who had never once asked if Linda was okay, now called her a thorn. She wanted to scream. She wanted to ask her mother why, after everything Linda had done for them, she still saw her as a burden, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she remained silent, listening to her mother's voice on the other end, oblivious to the hurt she was causing. "Anyway, I just wanted to vent," her mother continued. "We'll talk soon. And don't forget about the money. I'll let you know when the car's ready." Linda felt the air rush out of her lungs. There it was again, the same old pattern. Her mother would always demand more, and Linda would always comply. She wasn't sure why she kept giving. Was it the hope that one day things would be different? That one day her mother would see her, not as a financial lifeline, but as a person? She walked over to the kitchen counter, grabbed the velvet bag with the necklace and stared at it. It was beautiful. But what good was it? What good was any of it if she would never be more than the useful child, the one who was always there when they needed something, but never truly seen for who she was? Linda didn't know the answer. But for the first time in her life, she was starting to think that maybe she didn't need their approval after all. Maybe it was time to stop seeking it. Linda sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her phone. It was nearly midnight, and the streets outside were eerily quiet. The weight of the conversation with her mother lingered in the air, suffocating her. She should be asleep by now, but sleep seemed like a distant dream. The words her mother had thrown at her echoed in her mind. "You're like a thorn in my side." She had been so numb, so used to the insults and the disregard, but that moment, when her mother had called her a burden, a thorn, felt different. It felt like the first time the mask had slipped entirely. Linda had always assumed that despite everything, her family loved her in their own way. But now the ugly truth stared back at her. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her mother. She hesitated for a moment before opening it, dreading what more could come. The message read, "Linda, I've found a car I like. The dealer is giving me a good deal. Could you please send me the money for the down payment? Just transfer it to my account. Thanks." Linda stared at the message for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She didn't know why she kept doing it. She didn't know why she couldn't just say no. The money she was being asked for wasn't even a small amount. It was the third time in the last 2 months her mother had asked for financial help, and Linda was running out of reasons to say yes. She had spent her entire life being the family's fallback. When Mark's medical bills piled up, Linda had helped. When Emily needed a loan to pay for law school, Linda had come through. But where was the reciprocation? Where was the love? She had been helping her parents for years, often stretching herself thin, while they still treated her like a tool, something to be used and discarded at will. She felt that old familiar ache in her chest, but this time it was sharper. It wasn't just disappointment, it was resentment. She was tired of being the one who was always there, the one who could be relied on for everything except love and respect. Still, after a long pause, she typed a response. "Okay, I'll send it over tonight." Linda knew she was weak. She knew she would send the money. But she couldn't help herself. She was stuck in a cycle she had never been able to break. She hit send, hoping that this time it might be different. Seconds later, she picked up her phone again, the vibration buzzing in her hand. It was another message from her mother. She opened it immediately, only to be greeted with an unexpected notification. It wasn't meant for her. "I can't believe that girl. Always asking for money, never gives me a break. She's like a damn thorn in my side, always wanting something. I wish she'd just leave me alone." Linda blinked at the words. Her breath caught in her throat as she realised it was a mistake. Her mother had accidentally sent the message to her instead of a friend. There, in black and white, were the words her mother had truly meant all along. Linda was nothing more than a burden, a nuisance. She had known it, of course, deep down. But to see it so blatantly, to read it as if it had been carefully crafted, felt like a punch to the gut. She dropped her phone onto the table, staring at it in disbelief. Her hands trembled and her heart pounded in her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly seeing her family for what they were, manipulators and users. She had always been the one to forgive, the one to make excuses for their behaviour. She had convinced herself over and over that they didn't mean it, that they loved her in their own way. But now there was no more denying it. She wasn't just the invisible middle child. She was the unwanted one, the useless one, the thorn in their side. Linda sat there for a long time, not knowing what to do with herself. She had given everything, her time, her money, her heart, and yet she had never once been treated like she mattered. She had spent so many years trying to prove herself, trying to show her family that she was worth loving, worth respecting. But now, after reading that message, she realised the painful truth. They would never love her the way she needed. She wanted to cry, to scream, to throw her phone against the wall. But instead she felt a cold, simmering anger building inside of her. It wasn't just that her mother had said these things. It was that she didn't even know how deeply it hurt Linda. Her mother had reduced her to a mere convenience, an object, a resource. Linda reached for her phone again, this time with a newfound resolve. She opened the banking app, checked the transfer, and froze for a moment. Then, with a deep breath, she did something she had never done before. She cancelled the transfer. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she stared at the confirmation, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what came next, but for the first time in her life she was taking control of her own story. She wasn't just going to be the daughter they called when they needed help.
She was done being the one who always gave, always sacrificed. Linda took a deep breath, stood up and walked over to the window. She was done. This was the last time.
Linda sat at the kitchen table, staring at her laptop. It was a quiet Sunday morning, the kind of peaceful moment that used to bring her comfort. But today the stillness felt suffocating. She had spent the past few weeks in a whirlwind of emotions, anger, frustration, confusion, but now she was determined to focus. She was ready to take control of her life again, starting with her finances. Her dream of owning a home had always seemed distant, but now, with a steady job, a promotion, and the promise of a future with David, it was within reach. She had been saving for years, putting aside a little here and there whenever she could. But as she pulled up her bank account, Linda realised something was terribly wrong. For the first time, she took a good look at her savings. The total was far smaller than she had expected. Her heart sank. All these years, all the hours spent working, all the sacrifices made. And this was all she had to show for it. The number staring back at her was meagre, barely enough to cover a small deposit for an apartment, let alone buy a home. Linda clicked on her transaction history, hoping to pinpoint where the discrepancy lay. She started scrolling, expecting to see a few large purchases, perhaps a vacation or some unnecessary splurges. But what she saw made her stomach twist. There, across months and years, were endless transactions, payments, transfers, hundreds of payments to her parents, thousands of dollars spent on emergencies, on family needs, on things she had never once questioned. Her finger hovered over the screen as the numbers continued to add up. Over the last 10 years, Linda had sent more than $100,000 to her family, to her parents, her brother, her sister. Her entire adult life had been spent bailing them out. There were payments to her mother when the car needed repairs, payments to her father when his small business struggled, payments to cover her brother's student loans and her sister's wedding expenses. Linda had never thought to question it. Every time someone asked for help, she simply sent the money. Without hesitation, she was the one who always said yes. She thought back to all the times they had called. Her mum asking for help with medical bills, her father needing money to fix his truck, Emily needing funds to cover a legal case. Linda had given it all, and what had she received in return? Empty praise, little more than a "thanks, dear." Before the conversation turned to someone else, Linda leaned back in her chair, the weight of what she was seeing pressing down on her chest. It felt like a punch to the gut. She had spent her entire life giving, thinking that if she just gave enough, if she helped enough, they would love her. But the truth was undeniable now. She had been exploited. Her savings account, which should have been filled with the fruits of her labour, was almost empty. But her family, they had all the things Linda had dreamed of: homes, vacations, stability. And she had nothing to show for it but the knowledge that her efforts had been taken for granted. Linda scrolled further through the history of her transactions. She had never kept track of how much she had given, always assuming it would somehow come back to her. That one day her family would acknowledge her sacrifices, but all she saw now was a long list of loans. Loans that had never been repaid, never even acknowledged as anything more than routine transactions. They weren't gifts of love or gratitude. They were simply expected. The reality hit Linda hard. She had been so caught up in the idea of helping, in being the good daughter, that she had never stopped to ask herself why she was doing this. Why had she kept bailing her family out financially when it was clear that they had no intention of ever paying her back, emotionally or monetarily? She sat there for a long time, the numbers swirling in her mind. She had worked hard for everything she had, yet it had never felt like enough. She had been giving and giving, always doing what was expected of her, always showing up. But in the end, it felt like she had given away her life. She closed her laptop and leaned back in the chair, taking a deep breath. For the first time in years, Linda didn't feel the weight of family expectations pressing on her. She was done. She didn't know how or when it had happened, but something inside her had shifted. The veil had been lifted, and she could see things clearly now. She wasn't going to keep giving anymore. She wasn't going to keep draining herself for people who didn't even see her. This was the end of the road. She was finally going to take back control of her life. And that started with the money. Linda stood up, her resolve hardening. It was time to make a change. Linda sat back down at the table, her mind still reeling from the total amount she had sent over the years. $100,000. She could barely comprehend it. The money she had sent her family over the past decade could have been used to build a solid foundation for her future. It could have been invested or saved for something meaningful. But instead, it had disappeared into the black hole of family, emergencies, and needs. Her eyes scanned the screen of her laptop, the same numbers staring back at her. She wasn't even sure how to process it. There was so much money, so many years spent pouring her heart and soul into giving to her family. And for what? To be ignored, to be overlooked, to be called a burden. She began to type. The first line of her journal read, "Financial contributions to family, 2009 to 2020 inches." As she wrote, Linda's mind wandered. The first year she started really helping was 2009. Her father had needed money to keep his small business afloat after the recession hit. She had sent $5,000. Then just months later, her mother had fallen ill, and Linda sent another $3,000 for medical bills. Over the next few years, it didn't stop. There was always someone needing something. Mark's medical school loans, Emily's college tuition, the car repairs that never ended. It felt like Linda was constantly writing checks, constantly transferring funds. But the most glaring entry on her list was the $12,000 she had sent to her sister Emily in 2016. She had convinced Linda that it was for her law school final exam fees, a necessary expense to ensure her future in law. Emily had even cried on the phone, telling Linda how difficult things were for her. At the time, Linda had sent the money without question, just like she always did. It had felt like an investment in Emily's future, a way to help her achieve her dreams. But a year later, Linda discovered the truth. She had been scrolling through social media one evening, mindlessly clicking through photos, when she saw something that made her stop. There was Emily, standing on the beaches of Spain, a wide grin on her face, holding a drink with a little umbrella. She was on vacation in Europe. Linda's stomach turned. The $12,000 that she had sent to cover Emily's exam fees had been used for a lavish European getaway. Linda's mind raced, replaying the phone calls, the tears, the convincing words her sister had used, and she realised with a jolt of anger that Emily had lied to her. Emily hadn't been struggling. She hadn't needed the money for school at all. She had used it to travel across Europe while Linda worked double shifts to pay her own bills. The betrayal stung like nothing else. Linda's hand trembled as she wrote the next line in her journal, $12,000 for exam fees. Used for European vacation instead, family manipulation. She stared at the words for a long time, the anger simmering under the surface. How many times had her family used her like this? How many lies had they told? Tears blurred her vision as she scrolled through the history of transactions again. Every dollar, every cent had been given with love, with the belief that she was helping her family. But now it felt like she had been a fool. Linda began to write more furiously now, detailing every instance of betrayal, every transfer, every lie. Her family had built their lives on her sacrifices, and she had never once been acknowledged for it. There was no gratitude, no appreciation, only silence, only the expectation that she would continue to give. She wrote about the countless times her mother called her for money for new appliances, for new clothes, for a new car, while never once asking how Linda was doing. She wrote about the time she had missed her own promotion dinner because her parents had called her in a panic about a financial emergency. Linda had dropped everything to help them, but the next day there was no acknowledgement, no thanks, nothing. Now, as she scribbled in her journal, Linda realised how much she had given and how little she had ever received in return. It wasn't just the money, it was the emotional toll. It was the feeling that, despite her best efforts, she was invisible to them. Her heart ached with the weight of it all. She was done being the family's ATM, done being the dependable one. Linda closed her journal with a sense of finality. For the first time in years, she didn't feel guilty. She felt empowered. She wasn't going to let her family take from her anymore. She wasn't going to keep giving when she received nothing in return. For the first time, she was going to say no. Linda stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the velvet box in her pocket. The weight of it felt both light and heavy in her hand, like it contained the entire future she had dreamed of. She had been holding on to this moment for so long, ready to share the news, ready to finally feel acknowledged, appreciated. After years of feeling invisible, she had hoped that this Christmas dinner, surrounded by family, would be the moment when everything changed. Maybe, just maybe, her family would finally see her. Not as the person they relied on for money or favours, but as someone who had built her own life, her own happiness. The ring inside the box was simple, nothing too flashy, but it was perfect. It symbolised everything she had worked for, everything that had led her here, to this place in her life. David. She smiled to herself. David had been the person who saw her, not for her financial contributions or her role as the good daughter, but as Linda, the woman she had become. He celebrated her accomplishments, her creativity, and most importantly, he didn't ask anything of her except to love him. It was more than she could ever hope for. Linda picked up the small bag of gifts she had wrapped, each one carefully selected with thought and care. Her father, who loved books on history, would appreciate the rare first edition she had found for him. Her mother would love the scarf she had bought, a soft cashmere blend in her favourite colour. Her brother Mark would probably appreciate the expensive gift card to his favourite store, and Emily, her sister, would receive the beautiful jewellery she had found at a boutique downtown. Everything was perfect. As Linda drove to her parents' house, she felt a twinge of nervous excitement. Would her family finally acknowledge her? Would they see the woman she had become, the one they had always overlooked? Arriving at her childhood home felt strangely familiar. The house smelled like cinnamon rolls, just like it always had on Christmas morning. The tree, decorated with red and gold ornaments, stood in the corner of the living room, and the soft hum of holiday music played in the background. It looked perfect, just like the years before. But for Linda, it felt different. This year she wasn't just another daughter. This year she had something to share. She walked in, her father greeted her with a warm hug, and her mother followed with a lukewarm smile. "Linda, you look nice." "What's that you're holding?" her mother asked, eyeing the small bag. "Oh, just some gifts I brought for everyone. I have something special to share too," Linda replied, trying to keep the excitement in her voice under control. The evening started off just as Linda had hoped. Her parents, brother and sister gathered around the table, laughing and catching up. Mark was recounting his latest medical achievements, while Emily talked about her latest court victory. Linda nodded along, waiting for the right moment. She had planned it so carefully, the perfect timing for the announcement. But as the dinner continued, something felt off. There was no recognition of her own achievements, no mention of the promotion she had worked so hard for, or the fact that she was finally engaged to the man she loved. Linda waited for the right moment, but the conversation turned back to her brother's success and her sister's accomplishments. The compliments and praises flowed freely toward them. When it was Linda's turn to share, she spoke up. "Actually, I have some exciting news," she said, her heart pounding in her chest. "David and I are engaged." The words hung in the air, but instead of the congratulations she had imagined, her mother's face tightened. Mark didn't even look up from his phone, and Emily gave a half-hearted smile. "Well, that's nice," her mother said, her voice flat. "When did this happen?" "In October," Linda answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "We went to the mountains for a weekend and he proposed. It was really special." Her mother sighed. "You've been engaged for 2 months and you're just now telling us?" Linda felt the weight of her mother's words like a slap to the face. Her heart sank as her mother's eyes shifted towards the table, her attention already drifting to Mark, who had just returned from the hospital. Linda tried to brush it off, but the disappointment in her mother's voice stung. "Well, I guess that's nice, dear. But what does David do again?" "He's a teacher, right?" her mother asked, barely looking at her. "Yes, he's a high school English teacher," Linda replied, her voice growing tighter. "He's wonderful, Mum. You'll love him." Her mother simply nodded, her eyes already elsewhere. Linda's stomach churned with the realization that nothing would ever be different. She had hoped for a warm embrace, for recognition of her love and achievements. But instead she was met with the same indifference that had marked every family dinner for as long as she could remember. The gift exchange followed, but it was the same old routine. Mark handed out expensive gift cards, and her mother gushed about how thoughtful he was. Emily had purchased a weekend getaway for their parents, which earned her a round of applause and excited planning for the trip. Linda, on the other hand, handed over her carefully chosen gifts, items that had taken hours of thought and searching to find. The first gift was a rare book for her father, which he glanced at briefly before moving on. The second, a scarf for her mother, was met with a thanks before the conversation immediately shifted back to Mark's new watch. Linda felt her breath catch in her throat. She had given so much. She had worked so hard to be the one who gave, the one who tried to prove herself. But in this room, at this table, she was still invisible. And then, as if it had been orchestrated, her mother said the words that would shatter everything. "Linda, I have to be honest, I've been thinking about this engagement of yours. You know, at your age, I just don't know if this is the right decision. You're the most useless child we have. I just hope David knows what he's getting into." The silence that followed her mother's words was suffocating. Everyone at the table stopped breathing. Linda could feel the sting of her mother's words cut through her, but instead of shrinking back, she stood tall. This was it. The words hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating everything around her. Linda stood frozen, her mother's voice still ringing in her ears. "You're the most useless child we have." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest, each beat a sharp reminder of the weight of her mother's words. The silence at the dinner table was deafening. Mark, Emily, even her father were all still, their eyes fixed somewhere else, anywhere but on Linda. She could feel the weight of their indifference, as if they were waiting for her to just disappear. Linda's hand clenched into a fist, the knuckles turning white as she tried to control the storm inside her. She had always swallowed the pain, always forced herself to smile through the hurt. But not anymore, not tonight. She took a deep breath and slowly stood up, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. She didn't know if it was the shock of hearing those words or the years of suppressed frustration finally spilling over, but she felt something shift inside her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't going to hide anymore. "I've had enough," Linda's voice rang out, strong and steady, cutting through the thick silence in the room. Her mother's eyes widened, a look of confusion flashing across her face. Linda's words were like a slap to the face, breaking the illusion that everything was fine, that their family was perfect. She had tried so hard to keep the peace, to make them proud. But after all these years, she had finally realised something. They would never be proud of her. Not for who she was, not for what she had achieved. Linda glanced at her father, who was now staring at the table, not meeting her eyes. His silence stung more than anything. He had never once stood up for her. It was always Linda, the peacemaker, the fixer, the one who had to swallow her pride for the sake of family harmony. But tonight she wasn't going to do that anymore. She turned back to her mother, her eyes hardening. "You're right, Mum," she said quietly, but with the kind of clarity that she had never allowed herself to express. "I'm useless. That's why I've been paying for your car repairs, your medical bills and your vacations. That's why I've been sending money to you and Mark and Emily for years. But I'm the useless one." Her mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked around, perhaps waiting for someone to speak, for someone to come to her defence. But there was only silence. Mark and Emily stayed quiet, their eyes flickering between Linda and their mother, unsure whether to intervene. Linda's heart was pounding in her chest, but she pressed on. "I've been helping you all for years, and you've never once appreciated it. You've never once asked me how I'm doing, what I need. You've never once been proud of me. You've always put me second. You've always made me feel like I was never good enough." Her mother's face twisted with irritation, but Linda didn't back down. "And I've had enough," she said, her voice growing stronger. I'm done being the family ATM. I'm done being the one you turn to when you need something. I'm done trying to prove my worth to people who will never see me for who I am." There was a brief moment of stillness, and then, as if on cue, her mother's voice broke the silence. "You're being dramatic, Linda," she said, as if this whole conversation were just another tantrum. "Families help each other, that's what we do. Why do you have to make everything so difficult?" Linda felt her chest tighten. It was the same response, the same dismissiveness that she had heard 1,000 times before. It didn't matter how much she gave, how much she sacrificed. It would never be enough for her mother. Nothing would ever be enough. "I'm not being dramatic," Linda replied, her voice calm but firm. "I'm being honest. For the first time in my life, I'm saying what I've been holding in for years. I am done. I am done being the person who has to keep sacrificing for everyone else. You want to know why I'm useless? Because I've spent my entire adult life giving everything to you, to Mark, to Emily, and I've got nothing in return. Nothing." She turned to look at her father, who still hadn't said a word. He was the one person who could have stood up for her, the one person who could have said something, anything. But he hadn't. He had stood silently by as her mother crushed Linda over and over again. "You've never once defended me, Dad." Linda's voice cracked with emotion. "You've never once stood up for me, not when Mum belittled me, not when she treated me like I didn't matter. You've let her do this to me, and I'm done." Her father's face softened for a moment, but he didn't say anything. He just stared at her, his eyes filled with regret, his lips pressed tight. Linda looked at her mother one last time, her heart heavy but her resolve firm. "You want to know what kind of person would marry me?" she asked, her voice steady. "Someone who sees that I've been giving without ever asking for anything in return. Someone who sees that I've been the one holding this family together while you tore me apart." She turned to walk away, but before she did, she took a deep breath. "I'm going to build a life without this, without you. And if you can't respect that, then maybe you should stop calling me." And with that, Linda walked out of the room, leaving behind a stunned family and a mother who had finally seen what it felt like to be the one left speechless. Linda stepped away from the table, her hands trembling, but a sense of clarity washing over her with every step. The silence in the room was deafening, and she could feel every set of eyes on her. Her heart pounded in her chest, but it was no longer fear or uncertainty that made it race. It was anger. Anger at herself for being manipulated for so long. Anger at her family for pretending nothing was wrong. And now the time for pretending was over. Without saying another word, Linda reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She could feel the weight of it, the evidence of everything she had given, every sacrifice that had been ignored. It was time to end the game. The room fell even quieter. Mark's eyes flicked nervously from Linda to his phone, probably trying to figure out what she was about to do. Emily looked up briefly from her own phone, her face impassive. But Linda didn't care about their reactions anymore. She didn't care if they were uncomfortable. She had been uncomfortable for years. Linda opened her banking app, her fingers hovering over the screen for a moment as she searched for the right transactions. She scrolled through the long list of payments, some large, some small, all adding up to an amount that made her stomach turn. She selected the first few months, the earliest transfers, and held the phone up for everyone to see. "Here," she said, her voice calm but cutting through the tension like a knife. "This is the money I've been sending you all these years." She started reading the amounts aloud, her voice steady, her hand not trembling anymore. $5,000 to Mum in 2012 to fix the car. $2,000 in 2013 for Dad's medical expenses. $4,500 in 2015 to cover Mark's student loans. $6,000 to Emily in 2016 for law school fees. "What, you remember right, Emily? The money you said you needed for exams, but I found out you were using it to go to Europe." Linda's eyes locked with her sister's, the accusation hanging in the air like a challenge. Emily's face flushed red and she looked away, but Linda wasn't done. She continued reading. Another $3,000 to Mum in 2017 to cover Dad's back surgery. $2,500 for a new fridge in 2018. And the last payment in 2019, $8,000 to help Mark pay off his loans when his practice wasn't doing well. She paused, letting the silence linger as everyone took in the numbers, the staggering amounts of money that had left her account. Linda's fingers hovered over the next set of transactions, but she didn't need to read anymore. The numbers spoke for themselves. She looked up at her family, her eyes narrowing. And what did I get in return? Nothing. Her voice broke slightly, but she didn't allow herself to back down. I've given you everything. I've paid for every emergency, every crisis. And what do I get? I get called useless. I get told that I'm not enough, and I've had enough. Linda turned to her father, who had been silent through the entire ordeal. His face was pale, his mouth set in a firm line, but he didn't speak. Not a word of defence, not a word of apology, nothing. Dad, you've been just as much a part of this as Mom, Linda said, her voice firm but trembling. You've never stood up for me. You've always let Mom push me aside and control everything. You let her treat me like this. And for years I let it happen. But not anymore. Not now. Her father's face softened, but still he didn't speak. He simply looked down at the table, guilt and shame written all over his features. Linda knew that this moment, this confrontation, was a long time coming, but it still hurt. It still stung to see her father, the one person who could have stopped it all, just sit there silent. Then from the corner of the room, Linda heard a voice, sharp but full of support. Her grandmother, Eleanor, who had been sitting quietly in the back, watching the entire scene unfold, stood up. She walked over to Linda, her steps sure and confident despite her age. With a strength that Linda had never heard from her before, Eleanor placed a hand on her shoulder and turned to face the rest of the room. Enough. Eleanor's voice was strong, louder than Linda had ever heard it. Patricia, I have watched you treat Linda like this for far too long. I've sat by and watched you destroy this girl's confidence, her worth and her spirit. You've let her give, and you never once appreciated it. The room was completely still. For a moment, no one moved. No one dared to speak. Eleanor's eyes were sharp, her gaze cutting through the tension. You've treated Linda like she doesn't matter, like she's disposable, and I'm tired of it. Linda could feel the anger and frustration she had been holding in for so long start to dissipate, replaced by something else. Relief. It felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time, someone was standing up for her. Someone was saying the words she had always needed to hear. You should be ashamed of yourselves, Eleanor continued, her voice now ringing with authority. Linda has been the backbone of this family, and you've never once respected her. Not once, and I won't sit here and watch you tear her down any longer. Linda turned to look at her grandmother, tears welling in her eyes, but she didn't care anymore. She wasn't the weak, silent daughter anymore. She wasn't the invisible one. She was done being ignored. The room fell into a tense silence, as if the very air had thickened with the weight of Eleanor's words. Linda stood, her hands still trembling, but now filled with resolve, staring at her family. Her phone was still in her hand, the evidence of everything she had given. Her sacrifices, her years of financial support, clearly visible. She had laid it all out in front of them, the cold, hard facts, and for the first time in her life she wasn't going to back down. Her mother, Patricia, was the first to speak. Linda, you're twisting things, she said, her voice rising with defensiveness. You don't understand. We've always helped you too. It's just that sometimes... Linda cut her off, her voice steady and unwavering. You've always asked for help, Mum, but you've never once thought about what it's cost me. You've never cared to understand. She tapped her phone's screen and read the next transaction aloud. $1,500 to Mom in 2015 to pay off the car loan. $2,000 to Dad for his business expenses in 2017. $3,000 for medical bills in 2018. $5,000 to Emily for her law school tuition in 2019, she continued, her voice unrelenting. And here $10,000 to cover Mark's student loans in 2020. Linda felt the familiar tightness in her chest as she read the numbers, each one a painful reminder of how much she had given, how much of herself had been drained to keep everyone else afloat. She glanced up to meet her family's eyes. Mark and Emily avoided her gaze entirely, but her father, He was staring at the table, his face a mask of disbelief. He hadn't said a word since the beginning of the confrontation. Not one word of apology, not one word of defence. "I've never told anyone about this," Linda continued, her voice cracking with the weight of it. "I've kept track of every penny I've sent, every penny I've given to this family." She paused and let the silence linger. "But tonight I'm done hiding it. I'm done pretending like this doesn't hurt." Patricia tried to interrupt again, but Linda held up a hand, silenced her. "You don't get to speak right now, Mom. I need you to listen." She scrolled through her phone again, finding more transactions. $4,000 to Dad in 2019 for the renovations on the house, $3,500 to Emily last year for her business startup costs. "But you used it for a trip to Thailand, didn't you, Emily?" Emily stiffened at the mention of her trip, but she didn't respond. Linda's eyes never left her sister's face as she read more aloud. "And here's one from earlier this year, $2,000 to help Mark get out of debt when his clinic was struggling." Linda's words felt like they were cutting through the fog of denial that had surrounded her family for years. "Mark, don't act surprised," Linda said coldly. "I've been covering for all of you. I've been keeping this family afloat while you all built your perfect little lives." The silence in the room was deafening. No one spoke, no one defended themselves. It was as if her words had hit them with the force of a freight train, knocking the wind out of them. Patricia's face was red now, her eyes darting around the room, looking for any support. But no one gave it to her. Her father, Robert, was the next to break the silence. "Linda, I didn't know." His voice trailed off and he looked at the table, ashamed. He hadn't even looked at her once during the reading of the transactions, but now he was speaking. "You didn't know?" Linda repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. "You didn't know? You've been living in the same house as me for 40 years, and you didn't notice how much I was giving, how much I was sacrificing for you?" There was no defence from him. He just sat there, defeated. Linda's heart shattered just a little more as she saw the realisation slowly sink into her father's face. He hadn't known. All these years he hadn't known how much she had given, how much of herself she had lost. He hadn't cared. Linda's throat tightened with emotion, but she didn't let herself cry. Not now. She had already shed enough tears. This moment was about something else, about taking control, taking her power back. She stood taller, her eyes scanning the room one final time. "You all think you can keep taking from me, that I will always be there to bail you out, don't you?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with a deep, simmering anger. "But let me make one thing clear. The Bank of Linda is closed." She looked at each of them, her gaze sharp. "I am not your financial lifeline anymore. I am not your safety net. I am not here to keep you afloat while you treat me like I'm invisible." With that, Linda turned, walking toward the door. She didn't look back, but the words of her grandmother still echoed in her mind. "You've been the backbone of this family, Linda. You've been giving and giving, and they've never once appreciated it." Well, her grandmother's words gave her strength, gave her the courage to finally stand up for herself. And tonight, Linda knew that she was not going to be anyone's backup anymore. Linda slammed the car door behind her, her heart still pounding in her chest. The anger from the confrontation had started to fade, replaced by an eerie sense of emptiness. She wasn't sure how to feel anymore. The weight of what had just happened, of cutting ties, of confronting the family she had loved and sacrificed so much for, hung over her like a thick fog. She could still hear her mother's voice in her head. "You're the most useless child we have." The words were like a permanent scar now, etched into her soul, but this time they didn't sting the way they used to. Linda's vision blurred as tears welled in her eyes, the final release of everything she had kept inside for so long. She was alone, truly alone, and in that moment there was a strange comfort in it. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying anyone else's burdens. She wasn't living for anyone else. She sat there in the car for a while, her hands gripping the steering wheel, the tears flowing freely down her cheeks. The memories of years spent trying to earn her family's approval, of always being the one to help, always being the one to put everyone else first, seemed so distant now. She had spent decades pretending, and now there was nothing left to hide behind. Linda had always told herself that her family loved her. She had convinced herself that all the sacrifices she made were out of love, and that one day they would finally see her. But tonight, after everything she'd confronted them with, the receipts, the money, the years of unnoticed effort, she realised that love wasn't the reason. They needed her. They only loved her when it was convenient, when they needed her help. The realisation hit her like a tidal wave. Her family didn't love her. They just needed her. The thought was both freeing and heartbreaking. It felt like she had been living in a lie, believing that her family cared about her as much as she cared for them. But now she understood. The love they had for her was conditional. She had always been the useful one, the one who gave and gave without asking for anything in return. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from David, her fiancé. "I'll be there in 10. Don't worry, baby. We'll get through this together." She wiped her tears and started the car, trying to steady her breathing. As she pulled out of the driveway, she realised that she wasn't just driving away from her parents' house. She was driving away from a life that had held her captive for so long. She was finally free. When she pulled up to David's apartment, he was already standing outside, his face filled with concern. As she got out of the car, he immediately pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. His warmth, his strength, felt like a balm for the rawness that was still throbbing in her chest. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that, Linda," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But you did the right thing. You stood up for yourself." Linda closed her eyes, leaning into his embrace. The tears she had been holding back for so long flowed freely now, and David just held her, not trying to fix it or say the right words, but just being there, present. "I don't know what to do now," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I feel so lost. I thought I was doing the right thing, helping them, being there for them. But now I realise I've just been a tool for them. I've been giving, and they've never really seen me, not for who I am." David pulled back slightly, holding her face in his hands, his gaze steady and full of love. "You've been living for them, Linda. You've been living for them for so long, but now it's time to live for yourself. You can't keep giving to people who don't appreciate you. You need to put yourself first." His words were simple, but they cut through the fog in her mind. She had spent so much time trying to meet everyone else's needs, trying to earn their love and approval, and in doing so she had neglected the most important person in her life, herself. "You're right," Linda whispered, finally able to breathe again. "I've spent my whole life trying to make everyone else happy. I've lost myself in the process." David smiled gently, brushing her tears away. "You don't need their approval, Linda. You've already proven that you're worthy. You're strong, you're capable, and you deserve to live for yourself now. You deserve to be happy." Linda's heart ached with the truth of his words, but she also felt something else, hope. For the first time, she wasn't trying to fix things for anyone else. She wasn't trying to meet expectations or be the person everyone wanted her to be. She was finally choosing herself. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly, looking up at David. "You don't have to figure it out all at once," he replied softly. "One step at a time. You're not alone in this. I'm here." For the first time in a long time, Linda felt a weight lifting off her shoulders. She wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time she wasn't living for anyone but herself. Linda sat in her quiet apartment, the soft hum of the city outside her window, the only sound filling the silence. The past few weeks had been a blur of emotions, but there was a clarity now, something she hadn't felt in years, freedom. For the first time in her life, Linda was doing something for herself. No more running to her parents' house, no more responding to their demands, no more offering her support when it wasn't appreciated. She had cut off contact, blocked their numbers, and finally taken a step back to prioritise her own well-being. She had to. For the first time, she was learning what it meant to live for herself. No longer a tool to fix their problems, no longer a shadow in their world. She was choosing to exist without the weight of their expectations, without the constant emotional drain of trying to prove herself worthy of their love. Linda had begun to focus on the things that brought her peace. She took long walks in the park, something she had forgotten she enjoyed. She started reading more, diving into books she had put aside for years. She cooked meals for herself, slowly savouring every bite. And each day she made a conscious effort to save, setting aside money for her future, a future she had never been able to plan because she had always been too busy helping everyone else with theirs. Her savings account, for the first time, had a steady increase. She wasn't spending money on emergencies or last-minute loans to her parents. There was finally room for her own dreams, for her own needs. And though it felt like a small thing, each dollar she saved was a victory. But just when she thought she was finding some balance, something unexpected arrived, a letter. It was from her father. Linda had not heard from him since she left their house that night. After their last confrontation, she had blocked his number along with her mother's, determined to keep her distance. But now, in her hands, she held a letter, a handwritten letter, with her father's familiar looping handwriting on the envelope. She stared at it for a long moment, unsure of what to do. What could he possibly want to say? With trembling hands, she opened it. The words that greeted her were a stark contrast to the cold silence of the past weeks. Her father's words were humble, apologetic. He wrote about how he had failed to see the sacrifices she had made, how he had stood by and allowed her mother to treat her poorly. He expressed regret for not protecting her, for not standing up for her when she had needed him the most, and for the first time in her life he told her, "I'm sorry, Linda. I failed you." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected an apology, especially not one that felt genuine. He wrote about how he realised, too late, that he had always leaned on her, taking her generosity for granted. He admitted that he hadn't seen her as a person but as a provider, and now, in his own way, he was acknowledging the truth. The words felt heavy in her hands as she read them again. A part of her wanted to collapse in relief, to run back to him, to embrace the apology she had longed for. But another part of her, the stronger part, knew that this apology, no matter how heartfelt, wasn't enough to erase the years of hurt. The damage had been done. She couldn't go back. Linda leaned back against the couch, staring at the letter in her hands. Her thoughts swirled. She had spent so long trying to earn her parents' love, trying to prove her worth. But no matter how much she gave, they had never given her the love she truly needed. They had used her, and now, after all these years, they wanted her forgiveness. She didn't know what to feel. She had hoped for this apology for years. She had imagined it in countless fantasies, thinking it might heal the years of neglect, the hurt, the feeling of being invisible. But now that it was here, it only felt empty. Tears filled her eyes as she held the letter, the weight of everything hitting her all at once. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to forgive him. But could she? Could she ever look past the years of pain, the years of being the useful daughter, the one who was always asked to give, to sacrifice, and never once asked how she was? No, she realised, she couldn't. Linda folded the letter carefully, placing it on the table in front of her. She wanted to feel anger, to burn the letter in a dramatic show of finality, but instead she just felt exhausted and oddly relieved. The apology, though it was a long time coming, wasn't the answer. The answer was in her own decision to let go. She wasn't going to let her father's guilt or her family's manipulations pull her back into their world. She was moving forward, for the first time living for herself. She didn't need their approval anymore. She had her own path now. Linda wiped the tears from her face, taking a deep breath. She wasn't going to run back to the past. She wasn't going to settle for anything less than the respect she deserved. She was choosing to heal, to grow, and to move forward. And with that, she knew one thing for certain. She was finally free. The sun was setting as Linda stood in front of the small gathering of people, her heart beating steadily in her chest. She looked around at the people who had shown her love and support, the ones who had been there through the darkest times, and she felt something she hadn't known she was capable of feeling: peace. Her wedding had been simple, nothing like the grand celebrations she had once dreamed of. There were no extravagant decorations, no over-the-top venue. Instead, it was an intimate ceremony, held in a small garden by the lake, surrounded by close friends, family, and people who truly mattered to her. David was beside her, his hand holding hers, a steady and calming presence. Linda had chosen to invite only those who truly loved her, those who had stood by her, who hadn't asked for anything in return but to see her happy. She had shed the expectations of her family, and as she gazed at the few but meaningful faces before her, she felt a profound sense of relief. Her father, Robert, stood by her side as he gave the speech. He was not the same man who had failed to see her pain, not the same man who had been silent for so long. He was different now. There was an apology in his eyes, but more than that, there was respect, and Linda knew that it had taken a long time for him to get here, to finally see her for who she truly was, not as a means to an end, not as someone to rely on in times of trouble, but as a woman who had built her own life, her own happiness. Linda has always been a force, her father said, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. But I've only come to realise how truly strong she is. She is stronger than all of us combined. His words sent a wave of emotion crashing over Linda. For so long she had felt like the invisible one, the one who was always second to her brother and sister. But standing here today, in front of the people who mattered, she finally felt the love she had always sought. David squeezed her hand, his gaze never leaving hers. He was the man who had never tried to change her, who had always celebrated her, flaws and all. In his eyes she was perfect just as she was. He didn't see her as a tool, as a caregiver, or as someone who existed solely to meet the needs of others. He saw her for who she was, a woman with dreams, with strength, with a deep well of love to give. Linda felt the weight of the years lift off her shoulders. She was no longer the spare child, no longer the one who lived in the shadow of her brother's success or her sister's achievements. She was finally the main character of her own story. The ceremony was brief, but every word felt like a promise. When the officiant asked if Linda took David to be her lawfully wedded husband, she said, "I do," with conviction, without hesitation. She wasn't just saying it to him, she was saying it to herself. She was choosing herself. As they exchanged vows, Linda felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She was surrounded by people who truly cared about her, people who had never once asked her for anything but love and understanding. This was what family was meant to feel like, supportive, kind, and unconditional. When the ceremony ended, Linda and David shared their first kiss as a married couple, the crowd cheering around them. Linda's heart felt light, and for the first time in years, she was truly happy. She was free. After the ceremony, they took their seats at the small reception. The atmosphere was relaxed, warm, and filled with laughter. Linda looked around the room at the people who had been there for her, who had helped her heal, and felt the deepest sense of fulfillment. This was the life she had fought for. This was the life she had built. As the night went on, Linda caught David's eye across the room. She smiled at him, feeling a love that was deep and true. He had stood by her every step of the way, and now, as they started their new chapter together, she knew they would continue to build a future full of love and understanding. She had found her home in him. Later that evening, as they were alone in their hotel room, Linda sat on the bed, her hands gently resting on her lap. David, always so attuned to her, sat beside her, taking her hand in his. The room was peaceful, the quiet of the night offering them a moment of calm before the world outside called them back. Just as she thought the night would end in peaceful silence, her phone buzzed on the bedside table. It was a call from an unknown number. Linda's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment she hesitated. David looked at her, noticing her hesitation. "Who is it?" "I don't know," Linda replied, her voice tight. She almost didn't answer it. She almost let it go to voicemail. But something inside her pushed her to pick it up. With a deep breath, she swiped the screen and answered. "Hello," she said, her voice shaky. "Linda, it's Mom," came the familiar voice from the other end. Linda's chest tightened. But she didn't say anything. She just waited, unsure of what to expect. There was a long pause before her mother's voice finally came through, softer than usual. I wanted to say something. I've been thinking a lot about you lately, and I just want you to know..." There was another pause. "I'm proud of you." Linda felt her heart stop for a moment. She wasn't sure if she had heard her correctly. Proud of her? Her mother's voice trembled. "You've done so much for everyone, and I've realised I've been wrong. I've treated you terribly, Linda. I'm sorry." For a moment, Linda didn't know how to respond. The years of pain, of neglect, of feeling invisible, all seemed to rush at her. But in this moment, she realised something. She didn't need her mother's approval anymore. "I've heard those words before, Mom." "But thank you," Linda said quietly, her voice steady. "I'm proud of myself too." As she ended the call, she turned to David, who was watching her with quiet affection. She smiled, a sense of calm and peace settling over her. She had chosen herself. She had broken free. And in this moment, she was no longer the spare. The night was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Linda sat on the couch, David beside her, the calm after their wedding still settling in her heart. The whirlwind of the past months, of cutting ties, of standing up for herself, and of beginning to truly live for her own happiness, felt like a distant memory now. But as peaceful as things were, there was still a small part of her that carried the weight of her family's past. She had blocked them, put up walls, and started living for herself. Still, she hadn't fully anticipated that one day she would hear from her mother again. The phone vibrated on the coffee table, its glow lighting up the dark room. Linda hesitated for a moment before she glanced at the screen. It was her mother. Her stomach twisted. She had only just begun to heal, and the thought of hearing from her mother again, after everything, felt like a test she wasn't sure she was ready for. Still, after a moment of uncertainty, she picked up the phone. "Hello?" Linda's voice was steady, but there was a tension there that she couldn't hide. "Linda?" came her mother's voice, softer than it had ever been before. There was no frantic demand for money, no desperate stories of hardship, no manipulative tone that Linda had grown so accustomed to, just quiet. "I just wanted to tell you something." Linda felt a pang of confusion. Her mother hadn't called in weeks, and when she had, it was always about one thing: help. This call felt different, and that unsettled her even more. "What is it, Mum?" Linda asked cautiously, bracing herself for whatever might come next. There was a long pause before her mother spoke again, her voice unusually calm. I was talking to Mrs. Henderson today, you know, from down the street." Linda felt her pulse quicken. Mrs. Henderson was a long-time family friend, someone who had always treated Linda as an afterthought. "I told her all about you, about everything you've accomplished, your promotion, your wedding, your strength." Linda's breath caught. She had never heard her mother speak like this before. Pride? Was that really what her mother was expressing? The woman who had spent years belittling her, comparing her to others, never acknowledging her efforts, now spoke as if she was proud of her. It felt surreal, almost unbelievable. "I just wanted you to know that I told her that I'm proud of you, really proud." Her mother's words were quiet, but filled with a sincerity Linda had never expected. "I've been thinking about it, and I realise you've always been stronger than I gave you credit for. You've done everything for this family, and you've still managed to build a life for yourself." Linda sat still, the words washing over her. Pride, recognition. It was something she had longed for her whole life, but now that she was hearing it, it felt empty, like a promise made too late to change the past. "Mum," Linda said, her voice calm but a little sad, "I appreciate that, I really do, but I don't need your approval anymore." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Linda could imagine her mother stunned by the directness in her voice. The dynamic between them had shifted, and though it was painful, Linda knew that this moment, this conversation, was an important one. It wasn't about revenge, it was about closure, about realising that her self-worth was not tied to her mother's approval, that she didn't need to keep seeking validation from the family that had never truly seen her. "I've spent so many years trying to prove myself to you," Linda continued, her voice steady and strong. "But now I'm doing this for me. I've finally learned that I am worthy of love and respect, not because of what I can give or what I can do for others, but just because I am me." Yeah. Her mother was silent for a moment, and Linda thought the call might end there. But then with a soft sigh, her mother spoke again. I know now, Linda, I've been wrong. I'm sorry for everything." Linda closed her eyes. The apology was not what she had hoped for, but it was still an apology. It was still progress. But she didn't need to keep chasing it anymore. She had already healed, already moved on. "Thank you, Mum," Linda said quietly. "But you don't have to apologise anymore. I'm not the same person I was before, and I don't need your validation to know that I'm enough." Her voice softened, and she could feel the weight lifting from her chest. "But I'm glad you're proud of me. I'm glad you can see me now." Her mother's voice was barely a whisper as she responded, "I am. I really am." Linda nodded to herself, even though she knew her mother couldn't see it. "Well, I hope you can find peace, Mum. I'm finding mine." And with that, she ended the call, placing the phone gently on the table. It wasn't the answer she had once wanted, but it was the one she needed. She didn't need her mother's approval anymore. She didn't need the constant validation or the toxic cycle of giving without receiving. She had made it this far on her own. She had built a life that was hers. David, who had been sitting silently beside her, wrapped his arm around her shoulder. Linda leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his embrace and the steady support he had always provided. They didn't need anyone else's approval. They had each other. "Thank you for being here," Linda whispered to David, the words full of gratitude. David smiled softly. "Always, babe, always." Linda smiled back, her heart full of peace. She was no longer the spare. She was finally the woman she had always meant to be.